All right, good afternoon everyone. So my name is Walid Jumlat Abdullah and I'm an assistant professor at the Public Policy and Global Affairs program. Okay. So I will be talking about PPGA, but I thought why not let me show you what PPGA is about. So I will be giving a mock lecture of sorts, and then I'll spend about 5 to 10 minutes briefly talking about PPGA, because a lot of the stuff that I want to share about the mechanics of PPGA can be found in the prospectus anyway. I'll be briefly talking about it nonetheless. But I wanted to show you and see whether this is your cup of tea. If it's your cup of tea, then PPGA is for you. If it's not, then it's okay. No hard feelings. Okay. So let me start. I will be talking about human rights in today's world. Okay. So, and it was of course Nelson Mandela, one of the most important, prominent, significant proponents of human rights in the past 100 years, who said that to deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity. What exactly does being a human mean? For a lot of people, for all of us here would agree that being a human entitles you to certain things. Being a human means you are entitled to some rights just by existing. Right? All of us agree that. Right? But probably where we disagree, or where people disagree, is what exactly are those rights? Where are the lines to those rights? Where does one person's rights end and the others begin? Right? Is there such a trade-off? Right? But this statement by itself is quite uncontroversial, right? So to deny a person, for instance, the right to basic water or clean water, that is taking away, stripping them of their humanity. That is stripping them of their dignity. And I think all of us probably would agree. Then what about food? Would that be a basic human right? A lot of people would say yes. And then we go further. What about healthcare? I think a lot of people would say yes. But then should healthcare be free? And we know that healthcare in Singapore is not free. Is that a violation of human rights? Right? In Western Europe, in a lot of countries in Western Europe, healthcare is pretty much free. Healthcare in the United States is extremely expensive. It's ridiculously expensive. Right? Is that a violation of human rights? So obviously there will be some gray areas even if we can agree on certain principles. And that principle is just by existing, you are entitled to some rights. So I will be talking about, so that's just a teaser, I'll be talking about human rights as a concept and some complexities and contradictions when we discuss human rights. So firstly, I just need to mention, having a right to do something doesn't mean it is right to do something. Just because you have a right to do something doesn't mean you are right in doing it. Right? So right now, you have a right to just stand up and shout at me. You have a right. But that wouldn't make you, I hope nobody does it, but that wouldn't make you right. Right? You have a right to do that. You have a right to question my fashion sense. Right? But you probably wouldn't be right in doing that. Or maybe you would. I don't know. Right? That's subjective. So just because you have a right to do it doesn't mean you need to do it or you should do it. Right? It just means that you can do it. Right? So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is what the United Nations describes as the most important document in human history. Okay? The United Nations declares this declaration to be the most important document in human history. And this was passed at the General Assembly in 1948, very early on. Very early on. And it forms the basis for what most of us understand what is human rights. So, I mean, there are many paragraphs. I'll just discuss some of the more important ones. There is a recognition of the inherent dignity of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family in regard to freedom, justice, and peace in the world. So everyone is entitled to freedom. Everyone is entitled to justice. Everyone is entitled to peace. And there is disregard and contempt for human rights which have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind It's written in 1948, so that's why it's a bit, the English perhaps is a bit different back then, right? So for us, 2024, it looks a little bit clumsy. But basically, there is freedom of speech and freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. Now, freedom from fear and freedom from want, I mean, I think that's quite uncontroversial, right? All of us believe that we should live in absence of fear, right? I guess some fear is good. It regulates human emotions and human behavior, but massive fear. But what about freedom of speech? Right? And if you ask a person, everybody will say, yeah, I believe in free speech. And then they will start drawing lines, right? Oh, except for this, right? Except for that, right? So if I were to ask you, and anybody can just answer, you can just shout out, or if you want to raise your hand and come here, feel free to do so as well, right? Should there be limits on free speech when it comes to religious discourse in Singapore, right? So should somebody be allowed publicly to criticize somebody else's religion, which is allowed in the United Kingdom, for instance? Should that person be allowed to say that? Anyone wants to say? You can say yes or no. Yes? Yes, that person should be allowed to. Yes, no. So father says yes, son says no. So that's freedom in the family, right? That's freedom in the family. So anybody wants to share why you think yes or no? Yeah, sir. Maybe yeah. So let's put him on the spot a little. Okay. Okay.
Oh my God, that's good. So your question is?
My question is, should a person be allowed to criticize another person's religious beliefs in public?
I think it's allowable. Reason why it just depends on how you criticize a person. It can be criticize it with eternity, or you can criticize it in a negative way. So if you are
criticize it in a what?
In a positive way or a negative way. Okay. So if it's a constructive criticism, I think that is not a problem.
So what is an example of a constructive criticism? Okay, I won't put you on the spot like that. Yeah. So you disagree with?
So I think that if it's I think no, you shouldn't be able to do it, and maybe that's because respect is also a human right to most people, and freedom of speech is a human right, but I think respect should be valued more than freedom of speech.
No, that's interesting. Thank you so much. Right. So respect. Yeah, you can applaud. You can applaud. So respect is a right itself, right? Is respect a human right, you think, or does respect have to be earned, right? But yeah, that is the complexity of this. If you ask many people, 10 people, probably you have 2 to 3 different answers, right? I personally think that it should be fair game, right? A person's religious beliefs should not be off the table in terms of criticizing. Now, the issue with once we say, oh, if you criticize it this particular way, it's allowed. If you criticize it this particular way, it's not allowed, right? Then who gets to determine when it's allowed, when it's positive, when it's not positive, right? Now, so I think nothing should be off the table. However, that is not the way that Singapore functions, right? And you can understand how Singapore functions and what is the reasoning behind that as well. For the government, there is no such thing as freedom of speech when it comes to racial and religious criticisms. And that's a perfectly rational position to take as well, right? But my point is, you can take whatever position you want. The point here is, these things are always contested, right? And there are no easy answers to this. Even if you say, I agree with freedom of speech as a concept. Now, and this is one of the articles, whereas it is essential if man is not to be compelled to have recourse, as a last resort, you can rebel against tyranny and oppression. If you are denied your basic human rights, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that is agreed on by countries of the United Nations. Basically, this is agreed upon by the world. You have a right to rebel against tyranny and oppression. Now, and some other articles, and I think all of these are non-controversial, right? No one shall be subjected to slavery or torture or inhuman or degrading treatment and punishment. All are equal before the law. Okay. So, what is a right? As I said, a right doesn't mean morally right. A right means an entitlement. You don't have to do anything to earn it. Right? Now, and then we can think about what our young friends said, right? Where is a person entitled to respect? Right? Is a person entitled to respect? Should I respect you just by virtue of you existing, right? I may not know you. You may be a good or a bad person, right? Is there a need for me to respect you? And there is a conversation to be had. Maybe you say, yes, there is, right? So this is what I always say, right? I don't need to respect your beliefs, and you don't need to respect my beliefs, right? So when this idea, I think it's a bit politically correct, right? When people say, oh, I respect your belief, right? No, actually you don't, right? So, for instance, right? So I am a Muslim, right? You don't have to tell me that, oh, I respect your belief. No. If you actually respected my belief, you probably would have been a Muslim already, right? It follows, right? And that's fine. You don't have to respect my belief. All you have to respect is my right to believe in whatever I want to believe in. Even if you find it to be nonsensical, you just have to respect my right to believe in whatever I want to believe in. Now, that is, I think, what I'm entitled to. I am not entitled to respect from you. I am entitled to respect for my right to believe in whatever I want to believe in. Right? So, human rights, as I said, just by existing, you don't need to do anything to earn that. Right? You don't need to do anything. And so, to be more technical, right, you can say it's to be free to do something, to exercise a power, or to be provided with some benefit, right? So these are the three facets of a right. Now, of course, it sounds good, and I definitely agree with it, and I think it's something that all societies should aspire towards. And all societies, at the very least, pay lip service to it, right? Even North Korea is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, right? Because they also acknowledge that there is some lip service that needs to be paid, salutary, right? But that means they at least agree with the idea that there is something to be pursued there. So, first of all, some complexities or contradictions of human rights, right? Where does the individual right end and the collective good begins? Or is there such a distinction to begin with? Right? So, a simple example, something that we all just went through, right? Vaccine mandates. Vaccine mandates. Now, one could make a case that a vaccine mandate violates the individual right of a person. And I think it does. I think it does. The question is whether that violation is justified. And I think it's justified as well. Right? It's justified on the basis that if you are not vaccinated, you are more likely to spread a disease which could potentially kill people. Right? But I wouldn't pretend and say it's not a violation of human rights or of individual rights to choose. I think it is a violation. I just think it is a justified violation. But you can think otherwise as well. And then the other one is hurtful speech, right? Now, maybe our government has decided to draw the lines at race and religion for hurtful speech. And I think all of us can, even if we disagree, we can see where they are coming from, right? So it's perfectly rational. But where do we draw the lines? What if some younger person comes and say, oh, I'm actually offended by anything you say about this, right? So I don't want anybody to discuss anything about fashion, right? Because I feel extremely sensitive about it. Okay. Then an older person comes along and say, oh, I don't want any jokes about age, right? It's ageism, right? I cannot accept it, right? So then we draw another line. Okay, so fashion is one, ageism. Another person comes along and say, oh, I don't want any discussions on healthcare. It's very sensitive to me, right? Because I have parents who work in healthcare. So everybody starts drawing their own individual lines, right? Are we really going to govern a society based on people's subjective feelings on what hurt them? If that's the case, there is literally nothing you can say in a public sphere, Literally nothing. But are we then just going to say there are no lines at all to be had? So obviously it is not an easy question as well, right? Okay, so that's the first one. First complexity is individual rights versus collective good. Right? The second one is cultural exceptionalism. So a lot of what we understand as human rights were developed in the West. Now, just because it was developed in the West doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it wrong also, right? That's just a factual statement. It was developed in the West. It could be right, it could be wrong. It doesn't have to be either, but we must assess them for what they are. So what if non-Western countries have some things, right, which do not jive with the understanding of human rights? For example, the death penalty, right? The death penalty, a lot of people would say, a lot of Western people would just, it's incredulous to them that the death penalty exists in Singapore, right? The death penalty doesn't just exist, it's supported by a majority of Singaporeans. There are some who disagree with it. There are some who disagree with it for sure. But I think the data we have indicates that a lot of people are in favor of the death penalty. So, is instituting the death penalty a violation of human rights? How many of you think the death penalty should be abolished? But don't worry, there are no cameras. And in university, this is what we do. Okay, we are extremely open and we are able to say whatever we want. And criticize the government to the extent we want, right? As long as it is done with solid understanding and facts, it's fine, it's okay. So this is why I wanted to do the mock lecture, right? So to do the demonstration. How many of you think the death penalty should be abolished? None? Oh, one, thank you. Still, there's still a few liberals in society. Okay, so only 2 people. I am a bit shooketh. There are only 2 people. I thought there would be more young people who would be against the death penalty, right? So maybe you can share why you think it should be abolished.
To a certain extent.
Okay, so you have to tell me 10%, certain extent is 10%, 20%. So what does that mean?
I mean, I think there's kind of like a gray area in today's society. Especially on our policies, whether in Singapore or across the globe. So maybe like the percentage that I stand with abolishing the death penalty, not that high either, maybe about 30 to 40.
Okay, so you are largely in favor of the death penalty. It's just that, just some slight discomfort with it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay. I mean, since most of you agree with the death penalty, there's no need to belabor the point already. So, but you can see why this would be controversial to some people. For me, the most persuasive argument against the death penalty, would be the fact that it's irreversible, right? If you sentence a person to life imprisonment, and then the facts happen to come out 10 years later, there's a new form of DNA testing that is better and more accurate, exonerates the person, that person can come back. But if that person has been sentenced to death, there's no way to reverse the punishment. I think that's a pretty persuasive argument. And then somebody may come along, oh, what if that person has confessed? Confessions? You put me 24 hours without sleep in a room with Minister Shanmugam, I'll confess to anything, right? So, I'll confess to anything, right? So it's not, a confession could, I think it's a good way, a confession is a good way, but it could be, it is not perfect as well. Now, I am saying this just to acknowledge the other side. I am not against the death penalty. And I know I'm in the minority probably amongst my colleagues, right? So I am okay with the death penalty, maybe not for drugs trafficking, but I think I'm okay with the death penalty in principle for murder, and I would extend it even to violent rape. I would extend the death penalty. So I'm not against it. I'm just saying what people have made arguments against, right? And I think those arguments are serious and we need to consider them. The irreversibility. I don't think that's something that you can just dismiss, right? But how far should we take the argument of cultural exceptionalism, right? So There scarification, if you guys are familiar, this is in our backyard in Southeast Asia, right? There's the practice of elongating a woman's neck to appear more attractive. Now, if you ask the women in those tribes, they would say, we are doing it willingly, so what's your problem, right? But there could be cultural expectations, right, that affect what they are doing. So, and of course, this is quite common in some African tribes as well, right? Permanent disfigurement. And you can think of even more egregious examples of cultural exceptionalism. I'll be happy to share them with you if you ask more questions. All right, and the third one, and this was what, if for those, I mean, the younger ones wouldn't know this, but maybe the parents in the audience, you remember in the 1990s, there was this whole debate about Asian values versus democracy, right? And for those who went to secondary school in the 1990s, you would know that our exercise book, right, the first five shared values, right, they were all Asian values. Right? It was during that time where it was a debate between Lee Kuan Yew and Mahathir on one side, and on this particular issue they were on one side, versus the Western world, which was the argument about whether democracy was universal. And Lee Kuan Yew, Mahathir was saying, no, Asian societies have their own standards. You cannot impose Western standards on ours, right? You come from a completely different background. How are you imposing this on us? So, one of the things that Lee Kuan Yew and people like Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, Professor Kishore Mahbubani pointed out was that the biggest lecturers of human rights are the biggest perpetrators of human rights in the world, right? And America and the Western countries, this was something they mentioned all the time. And I think it's absolutely true, right? It's absolutely true. So, I'll talk about this in a while. So, but the people who claim to champion human rights often do so selectively, right? So, examples where during the Cold War and even after the Cold War, Western countries they were willing to support dictators throughout the world as long as they were anti-communist. While pretending to say they agree with democracy and so on, they were actually supporting people who suppress democracies in their own countries, right? And in fact, it became a foreign policy maxim in America, right? And FDR said he may be a bastard, but at least he's our bastard, right? He said that, right? He said that, and this became a foreign policy maxim in America, right? Until today, one of the biggest violators of human rights in the world is one of America's strongest allies, right? Saudi Arabia is an authoritarian country, right? They are one of America's strongest allies. If they really cared about liberal democracy, then you shouldn't be supporting Saudi, right? Speaking of American allies, right, and human rights violations, this is a picture in Gaza, right? The picture I have on the right, and on 27 October, and it was a call for a ceasefire, and only US and its allies voted against this United Nations resolution. Singapore voted for it as well. And think about this, right? This is about protecting civilians in Palestine and Israel. Who could possibly have the heart to vote against such? Who is the biggest lecturers on human rights, right? The United States. That's who, right? Just because their ally Israel is involved in this, and their ally doesn't want to, right? So the biggest, this is about Western double standards, right? And Singapore voted for it as well. Like most of the international community, it was US and its allies that voted against it. Reverend Manthur Isaac, he gave this sermon on Christmas. He is a pastor from Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus Christ, and he gave this sermon. It's called Jesus Under the Rubble. I just want to quote one part which is relevant here. He said, "To my European friends, after this, I never want to hear you lecture us about human rights ever again. You have lost all credibility to tell us about human rights since you have abandoned us in this time of need." And I will hold on to that for the rest of my life. I never ever want to hear a lecture on human rights from the people who voted against a ceasefire. I never ever want to hear that ever again. Right? So in conclusion, right? So human rights are essential because human beings are not just material creatures. We are also emotional creatures. We are spiritual creatures. And freedoms are essential. Therefore, freedoms are essential parts of the human existence. Right? At the same time, we must sift through rhetoric about human rights. So it's often used as a stick against non-Western countries, including Singapore, right? People lecture us about the death penalty and so on. And just because people tell us it's wrong doesn't mean we need to be defensive. We also need to be introspective and say, maybe it's right, but it doesn't have to be right, right? It could be right, it could be wrong. And our support for anything must always be based on principles, right? So it's okay, two things can be true at the same time. You can believe in the principles of human rights, and I do, and yet think that a lot of the Western countries have been hypocritical throughout the past 70 years on their rhetoric about human rights. So our support must always be based on principles and not who is or are involved, right? So some questions that we can ask, right? Are human rights universal? Is there such a thing as a universal right? Who gets to decide what is a human right? What are the limits of cultural exceptionalism? And for what are the limits of cultural exceptionalism, how far do you want to go? How far do you want to go? If you go it as far as possible, right, then there is no such thing as a universal right to begin with, right? And any dictator can just use, oh, this is my culture, right? You cannot disturb us. Oh, let me jail some people. This is my culture, right? I'm just jailing my political opponents because this is my culture, right? So how far do you want to stretch the argument of cultural exceptionalism? Okay. So that's my mock lecture. I'll just briefly talk about PPGA, and I'll be happy to take any questions about the lecture or about PPGA later on. Okay. So public policy and global affairs, and there are 4 subfields. So these are the 4 facets or 4 subfields of public policy and global affairs. So the first one would be international relations, where you study relationships between countries and international institutions such as the United Nations, US-China relations or tensions and so on. Comparative politics is second, and I do comparative politics. So you study domestic politics of different countries, but you compare and contrast them across countries. So I do Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand. Okay, and other people do other countries. So political theory deals with the big questions of life, right? Why are we here? What is the purpose of life, right? What is the trade-off between liberty and justice, if there is, right? So those big questions, right? Political philosophy. And finally, public administration. We have a couple of professors here from public administration, and it deals with the implementation and execution of public policy. Is that a good enough summary? Yeah, okay. So these are the 4 subfields of political science or public policy and global affairs. So public policy and global affairs is the equivalent of political science in other universities. People always question, then why do you not call it political science? This is our branding. That's as far as I can tell you. I didn't make this decision, okay? I just came here when this name was here already. So I'm in the unfortunate position of defending it, and that's as far as I can go, okay? So just think of it as equivalent to political science elsewhere. Okay? So these are our core modules. So intro to each of the 4 subfields plus politics of Singapore, and I teach politics of Singapore. And of course, okay, rankings don't really matter to us, right? So I'm just gonna ignore that, right? Singaporeans don't care about rankings, right? We care about the joy of education. Okay, so and I am also, as I said, the assistant chair of social sciences. So I'll just briefly talk about the social sciences. So we have those 4 programs, and then we have double majors. For PPGA, we have Econs and Public Policy and Global Affairs. We also have Environmental Sciences and Public Policy and Global Affairs. Okay? We have, that is with the non-social science faculties. As you can see, it is a lot of, it is a lot of double major or second major combinations. Okay? I'll be happy to talk to you more about that. I'll hang around after 5 as well. If you are a bit shy, you can talk to me personally after this as well. Okay, so this is where most of our students go. You can see for public policy and global affairs. So in general, for social sciences, every year we have the data, we track the data. About 70% of our students end up in the civil service. 30% are in the private sector, and it's across all sorts of industries. So investment, banking, some are in TikTok, not as influencers, but as managers and so on, in Meta, in Grab. So the reason why our graduates, and by the way, this data is publicly available. So you just Google Graduate Employment Survey 2023. MOE just released this 10 days ago, probably 10 days ago. And you can see all the majors in Singapore, from all the universities, what's their starting salary, median starting salary, and what's the percentage of students who got jobs within 6 months. And you can see that the social science, NTU social sciences do extremely well, right? Do extremely well. So for PPGA, I think the median starting salary was 4,123, right? 4,001, and that's incredible, right? For a starting salary. Right? All right, and I also wanted to say that we are more than just studying. So we have a lot of student activities. So these are our students, our student club. Yeah, so you can take questions as well later, Emily. So they organized the Triple S Forum, and you had Sim Ann. She came over. She's a senior minister of state, SMS Sim Ann from Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She came over last year. A few years ago, this was a forum on POFMA, and that is Minister Edwin Tong and Leader of the Opposition Pritam Singh. And it was our students who organized it, and I'm extremely proud that this was the first time ever that an opposition leader spoke at NTU, right? So I'm extremely proud. So our students have this all the time. You have all this, but we also have other, we have classroom activities. So every semester, for instance, I will invite guest lecturers. So for my Southeast Asian Politics module, I invited the Deputy Mufti of Singapore for the lecture on bureaucratization of Islam in Southeast Asia. This is Ms. Chua Mui Hung, who is one of the editors of Straits Times. And that's Professor Yaakob Ibrahim, the former minister, and they come to our classes. So every semester you will see this. I believe, who came for your class? It was a minister who came, Chee Hong Tat, I believe, right? Chee Hong Tat, yeah, came for your class last semester, right? Yeah, last semester. So we do have this a lot, and these are in class. You don't even have to attend outside class, because we do believe in making politics. And what we learn, we want to make sure that it is not just airy-fairy theory, right? We want it to be practical and applicable to real life, right? And of course, we have Triple S activities as well, and these are the two that I have chosen. Every year we have a sports day where the professors will square off against the students in all sorts of games. Let's just say everybody's a winner, okay? I don't need to tell you who won. And the other one is our students. Every year they organize a Custodians Appreciation Day, where they have an appreciation day for the cleaners in our building, right? Because for us, it is extremely important. It's part of our DNA, the social science DNA, for you to be socially conscious. If you're not socially conscious, if you don't care about other people, right? You can go to engineering, you can go to other, you can, seriously, I'm not trying to demean the other faculty. I am just saying, if you are not interested in people, you shouldn't be in social sciences, right? If you are interested in things, you go to engineering. If you're interested in people, you come to social sciences, okay? And that's it, that's our socials. Have we started yet, the TikTok? Next week, is it? Soon, right? We have the videos up already. We just need to create the TikTok account. So please subscribe to our socials, like and share and subscribe. And I'll be happy to take, we have about 21 minutes, I'll be happy to take any questions. Or if you have disagreements with what I say, I'm happy to hear them out as well. Thank you so much. Yes, okay. So if you could just pass the Lady at the back, the one in green, yeah. Go on.
Sorry, I just have a
I'm
question.
doing a Q&A. Yeah. Yes.
Would you be able to elaborate like I mean, if a student is determining whether they should do the public affairs and global affairs and versus PPE, because they both kind of link up with a similarity, one with economics, with for the business side, but how would you classify for the students, like where would your inclination be, given the two similar yet different courses?
Okay, thank you. So that's an excellent question. The question is, for those who didn't hear, what is the advice I would have for somebody who's considering between PPGA and PPE, which is our new program, Philosophy, Politics and Economics. So for me as the assistant chair of Triple S, I mean, I don't care as long as you enter Triple S, that's good enough for me. But I will try to do justice to your question. Okay, so while trying to be as honest as possible. So the PPE program is meant to be a highly selective program. Okay, so it is for students who have performed quite well in their A-levels or diploma. And it is meant to be that way because it is supposed to be a bit more intense than the single majors. Okay? So you are doing philosophy, economics and politics. Now, of course, there is a trade-off. You won't do the same amount of philosophy modules as you would if you majored just in philosophy. Right? The idea is not for you to be as good as somebody in philosophy as a philosophy major, but you're good enough to be an expert on it. And then you're good enough to be an expert in econs, you're good enough to be an expert in politics. Right? So that's the trade-off, right? For PPGA, obviously, it's more specialized. It's more specialized, and you will know more about public policy and global affairs than if you were a PPA major, for sure, because you're doing more. But I guess in terms of applying for jobs, our PPGA students always do well on the job market, so no problems there. I don't know for sure because it hasn't been started. My suspicion is our PPE students are going to do extremely well on the job market. Right? So I don't know whether I answered your question satisfactorily. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
Hello.
Yeah.
Just to question again, like, is this entire course the same as political science? Like, is it just political science? It's just the naming is a bit different.
Okay, yes. So I would say it is the equivalent of a political science course. You are asking in general, right? Not in comparison to any university, right? In general, yeah. So it is the equivalent of a political science course in other universities. Okay. I cannot see hands.
But then, to add on to that, right? To add on to that question, with regards to like NTU's pedagogy and their own curriculum, especially for PPGA, what's the difference between the way NTU conducts, like say PPGA, and the way say maybe module-wise, like the different types of modules? What's the difference between these, and perhaps what NUS offers in their own political science major?
So this is always a question I fear the most, right? And for the simple reason that I was from NUS, so I was from NUS Pol Science. So many of my professors are there still. So I don't have a bad word to say about NUS Pol Science. Okay, so if you're looking for tea, this is not the right place, right? So I think it's an extremely good department. Okay, so there are a few differences, of course. One is ours is better. The second, okay. So on a serious note, okay, that was serious also. But the second one is, if you enter political science in NUS, you enter without majoring first. So if you're unsure, right? If you're unsure what you want to major, I think it makes sense to go to NUS. But if you're already sure, you should come to NTU, I think. Right? The third difference is our classes are much smaller than in NUS Pol Science. So PPGA is the most selective of the four social sciences majors. So our cutoff point is also the highest amongst the four in Triple S. And what that means is we have a high quality level of students, and much smaller classes as well. Okay, so we have the seminars for level 2, level 3, level 4 will be between 15 to 25. Of course, there will still be the larger modules where you have lectures and tutorials, but our classes on average are smaller than the NUS Pol Science classes. And I would say this one I'm nitpicking a little because the difference is really slight. That NUS Pol Science is a little bit more theory oriented and ours is more policy oriented, but the differences are slight. So if you choose NUS Pol Science, no hard feelings, it's a good university, good department, you'll be in good hands as well. But of course I want you to choose NTU, right? Yeah. Okay. I hope I answered your question. Yeah.
I have a question on admission.
Please.
So sorry, I'm taking the airtime. But like as you mentioned, political science is a very high cutoff. So as parents and applicants, I think when we all look through the criteria, everyone tells you the lowest percentile is AAA, AA. I mean, if I have that grades, we won't be having this conversation at all. But I mean, for an average person, when you apply for holistic application, what is it that your department looks for? I mean, is grades the only thing you look at, like as a first criteria? I know every university says they don't, but we would like a real honest answer rather than waste your time and admission.
Thank you, and I'll give you an honest answer. Anybody who says, I've been to so many of these, right? Even when we get banks, people talking to our students, they tell you, oh, your grades don't matter, and they are lying because it matters, right? And I don't want students to think that it doesn't matter because it does, right? And I think that's terrible advice. So grades obviously matter as well when we are selecting students. I cannot lie and tell you otherwise, right? So what you have, the indicative grade profile, also public data that tells you last year's batch, right? Last year's batch from the social sciences, what was the 10th percentile, what was the 90th percentile. So you can just Google that, indicative grade profile. That will differ from year to year, but again, if I were to be honest with you, it probably wouldn't differ by much, right? Maybe 1 or 2, maximum 3 grades, right? So that's for the indicative grade profile and the normal admissions. We also have the aptitude-based admissions, right? Where maybe you didn't do too well, you didn't fail, but you didn't do too well, but you are the captain of the football team, right? Right? For me that matters. For me that matters because I know if you're the captain of the football team in JC, that means 4 to 5 times a week you were training. And if you manage to get a B for a subject, for me that matters more than a person who got an A and wasn't in any CCA. For me personally. So it matters, right? Of course, it's not just CCA, it could be service as well, community service in whatever form, or VIA and so on. So the aptitude-based admissions, we will look at a student more holistically, and all of those things matter. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Hi, Professor. First of all, thank you for giving the talk. I wanted to ask about the examinations in PPGA. What are they like?
Okay. So thank you. So generally for level 1000 modules, so these are the core modules, you'll have an exam. So about 40%. Roughly the numbers differ from module to module, professor to professor, but roughly it's 40% exam, 40% essay, and 20% class participation. Okay, how much you speak in class. So as you go further up, level 2, level 3, level 4, usually there's no exams. And then the assignments will differ from professor to professor, module to module. So one of my modules, a long essay, 40%, 2 short essays, and then class participation. Another of my module, 1 long essay, 40%, 20% class participation, and a video on anything at all in the module, right? And then I tell them, if you upload this on TikTok, you get 20,000 views, you get an A, no questions asked, right? As long as you don't buy the views, right? If it's good enough to do that. So it depends on professor to professor. But as you go further up, there will be fewer exams. There will be more essays and assignments. Okay? Okay, thank you. Yes. Is there a mic here? Okay, you can, Emily.
So I'm Sec 4 right now, right? And I'm thinking of going for IB or A levels, right? So do you think, does this module prefer like IB or A levels? Because SJ IB and JC A levels.
I think this is the first time I've heard a Sec 4 student coming to one of this. So thank you. There is no difference, right? There is no difference whether it's from a poly or A level or IB, right? As long as you meet the cutoff point, that's all that matters. That, of course, maybe one can make the case it's harder to get such high grades in poly, perhaps. But on our side, we do not care. As long as you meet those cutoff points, you will be accepted. We have no preference either way. Okay? Yes, there is a lady at the back. Emily? Oh, yeah, okay. Thanks.
Hi, so my question is about, I'm an IB student and I'm interested in courses like this. So in IB students, it doesn't really say on the website what grade that you should have at minimum, and even when I spoke to the admissions officers, they didn't really give me a figure. So I would like to find out more about that from you personally. Thank you.
Right, okay. So if the admissions people didn't give you a figure, you're asking me to. Well, okay, I also don't want to, okay, so I always put myself in the perspective of as a parent, right? When I come to the open house, right? I have two main questions I want to ask, right? One is, what are the jobs my son, my daughter can get? The second one was the difference between NUS and NTU, right? Pol Science. Those are the two main questions I have. So I get very frustrated. You know, last time it was I don't know whether it's still a policy, but if it is, I've abandoned it personally already, that you're not allowed to talk about other universities, right? Which I think is a joke, because that's the thing that people want to know, right? They want to know that. So I think it's important for us to be honest, right? So it's important for me to be honest also, and in regard to your question, there is no set, which is why it's not up there. But just now I was trying to ask around, and I think Emily can be my witness. So we were trying to ask around people who have gotten into the School of Social Sciences previously. So this is not scientific, okay? But it was 36, was that the one that we discussed? So around 36-ish. Would be enough. But again, this differs from year to year, and this is just from our unscientific sample, because we also do not have that cutoff point. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Okay. We still have about a few more minutes. Okay. Oh yeah, okay. So there's a question, yeah. Okay.
Hi, I was wondering, like, for me personally, I am interested in both engineering and this course, public policy. So is there a way for me to, like, weave it in?
That's a difficult question for me to answer. So officially, there really isn't. There really isn't, and I think my suggestion is you talk to your parents as well, and ultimately it's your decision, which of the two, because there just isn't that program where you do both, right? So you have to make a choice, and maybe it's possible to do one as a minor or something, right? I think that would be the easier way out of this, right? And then you have to think, what exactly do you want to get out of it, right? Which one is going to be more marketable to you? In terms of the combination, and which one do you think you will enjoy more, right? So, and let me just share a personal experience, right? So my undergrad was in econs. It was my master's and PhD were in Pol Science. So when I entered uni, I was always interested in politics, but I was thinking like, typical Singaporean, what is the degree that will get me the most money? So I went with econs, right? I went with econs, but I suffered for 4 years, and if I could do one thing in life, I could go back in life and do something else, I wouldn't have majored in econs, because it wasn't good for my mental health, right? Honestly, especially my 4th year, it was terrible. So you must also think, you want it to be marketable, so you don't have to love what you do, but you cannot detest what you do, right? So you have to think between interest and marketability, and that's as far as I can go. On the practical side, it's a choice. There is no double major or double degree with that combination. Yeah. Okay? Okay, if there are no other questions, I'll stay back, but everyone who doesn't want to speak to me, please feel free to leave. And thank you so much for coming today.